Hi, this is Ron Martinson of ronmartblog.com, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Fujifilm X-Pro 2. To my left is the Sony a6300, which I'm also reviewing at the same time, just by coincidence. And to the right is the Fujifilm X-E2, which is my own personal camera. And you'll notice that this is by far the largest three camera bodies. It's a pretty substantial and heavy camera body. The lens featured here is the 16 to 55 millimeter 2.8 XF zoom. There's no stabilization built into this lens. And if I compare that to the Sony 16 to 70 f4 with optical steady shot, you'll see that it's a much more substantial size lens. In fact, it feels a lot like a Canon 24 to 70 millimeter lens. So let's take a quick overview of this camera. So one of the great things about this camera is that you have lots of dials. I have a nice aperture ring which I can put into automatic. So if I go automatic here for shutter speed, then I'm basically in program mode. And then I can dial in my aperture all the way down to 2.8, whatever value in between that I want. I can adjust my shutter speed from 1/8,000th of a second all the way down to bulb mode. Or if I were to set my aperture to some value and leave that auto, then I'm the same as aperture priority mode, and vice versa. If I were to set in a shutter speed and leave that automatic, I'm in the same as shutter priority mode for other cameras. Now one of the real cool things is, let's say I wanted to choose both. I'm in automatic ISO, so I can be in manual and it'll choose the right ISO for the shutter speed and aperture that I've chosen. Or if I lift this ring, I can actually dial in a specific ISO, which is a nice feature. And you'll see 12,800, and then it starts going into its ridiculous modes. And so I usually leave it on auto, and you can control how auto behaves from the menu in terms of what it's going to use for its minimum and maximum aperture. So something to keep in mind. Now one of the things that really frustrated me when using this camera is how easily this dial moves. I wish it were just a little bit more firm, because what would happen frequently is I'd find myself accidentally bumping it, and so I'd underexpose or overexpose. So I wish it either did that or had a locking mechanism. The firmness of this knob on the Sony is much better, and that's actually what I would prefer. And it's a little bit more firm on my X-E2, so just a slight concern that I have there. You'll notice it's very similar, except this has a built-in flash. There's no built-in flash here. You have a hot shoe, but there's nowhere on this camera is there a built-in flash. Over here to the side, I can switch between single shot, continuous, and manual autofocus. This can accidentally be bumped too, but much less often. I think it's a little firmer than its predecessor, but it's still, I wish it was just a little bit more firm. But the nice thing is that this is a real photographer's camera, because all the important controls are all analog and you can get to them really easily. And that's one of the real nice features I like about this camera. On the back panel here, you can see that it's a very similar design to the X-E2 in that you have the selector buttons. They're the raised style, the nice click. And that's a huge improvement over the X-T1, which had the really frustrating inset buttons that didn't really make that click. So I'm really happy to see the return of these buttons. They're no longer labeled because they're programmable, but it's way better design. You also have this joystick, and then there's your other basic controls that are familiar to X-Pro users. Most importantly, the Q button, which is a really great functionality to get to your top-level menu items quickly and easily. Hopefully you can see this, but here's my Q menu. And I can use the joystick, which is super responsive, to select any of these items. And right now, for example, I'm in fine mode. I could go to raw plus fine, or just raw. And I'm going to go over to fine, which is a high resolution JPEG. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a burst mode. If you'll, actually, let's go ahead and show the drive menu that I'm in the 8 frames per second mode. I'm just going to point, over here, and this is JPEG burst mode. And as you can see, it goes on for a long time. So you don't have to worry about the buffer filling up. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. And you'll notice that it's flashing while it's flushing in this buffer, but I can still go in and do other things. So while it's doing that, I'm going to switch this over to a RAW for another test. And it's already finished. So we got, looks like 151 shots off really quickly. And I'm already accidentally bumped into being overexposed by one stop. So now I'll go into the menu, come up here to user setting and format. And that is a great segue to another important point about this camera. There's an access door on the side, which I love, so that I can get to my 2, if you can see that very well. You have 2 slots now, and I'm not using the greatest cards out there. I have some SDHC cards here that are 95 megabytes per second, and it's only an 8 gig card. And with, oops, let me turn this back on here. With no images and in RAW mode, I'm going to repeat that test. Okay, now we'll shoot. Probably got one more extra, but if you look, the buffer is being flushed out to the SD card. And if I choose play, 28 raw files flushed out pretty quickly. So very good burst mode performance, very good buffer. And so let's go through just a couple of features. Actually, one of the ones I like to look at is double clicking. Look at all those focus points. And the fact that I can easily select them so quickly with this joystick is a real pleasure. The menus are definitely a lot more complex. You'll see its IQ menu now has 3 layers to it, so pages 1 of 3. And I was shooting uncompressed RAW, just as an FYI. So lots of good stuff here. And if I come down here to, my save data settings, I can do switch slot, which isn't very intuitive, but to go from slot 1 to slot 2. Now, unfortunately, when I come back into this menu, I have to go back all again, but that's okay. Switch. Now I'm back on slot 1. So overall, I've been very satisfied with the performance and usability of this camera. Wish this was a little bit more firm. Wish this was a little bit more firm so that they weren't accidentally bumped. But other than that, it performed extremely well. The lens was fantastic, and it's just typical Fujifilm goodness, now featuring a good AF system that works, including eye autofocus that allows you to choose the eye, and it was extremely fast, worked very well. And then the ability to manually choose my AF point so quickly at such granularity was a godsend. I really love this camera for that reason. So check out my written review. Thank you very much. Bye.